Hi, my name is Ken Aaron, and you're watching Open Agenda. Now, usually a politician will try to get into office by broadcasting the fact that he's going to bring military contracts home. It's called pork barrel, and he's going to get the military to open up a base or open up some kind of facility in a local area, and therefore you should vote for him because that's an advantage. It's going to bring jobs and money, and you're going to have a big base here. Unfortunately, we've done that in the past in Southern California. And there's been an unfortunate legacy left behind by the military. In fact, I have some personal friends who are having to remediate some toxins that were left from the military or from some ancillary military contracts that were done by these, I think they're called aerospace firms or military firms that have these military contracts. And just not that they were making poisons to kill people, but things that they were using in their production to clean parts or to paint the sides of planes involved leaving residue or left behind toxins that have contaminated the area. And it isn't just a squeamish thing of, oh my, we can't put up with a bad smell. These are toxins that severely affect the health and well-being of people living in those areas and even in associated areas for a long, long time. Now tonight we're going to be talking with somebody from Physicians for Social Responsibility, and they've taken on the task of doing a discovery and revelation of some of these situations that past military production and contracts have left us with. So let me introduce you to our guest tonight, and we're going to go right into talking about military toxins in Los Angeles. Hi, Jonathan Parfrey. Good to see you again.
Hey, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so, coincidentally, I mean, I hadn't planned this, but there was just an article in the local paper about an occurrence in Santa Clarita where they were going to go ahead with a large gated community development. We've all seen those kind of developments where you got your, these days, it's at the time we're taping, it's like $1 million house, 3 bedrooms and stucco and tile roofs and all of that, gorgeous Santa Clarita out of the city, this is heaven. And they had to stop this development because of something about jet fuel in the wells.
That's right. There was the Whitaker Bermite facility up in the Santa Clarita Valley. Was using this chemical. It's called ammonium perchlorate. Perchlorate is an ion of ammonium. And what happens is that when the body absorbs perchlorate, it actually blocks the thyroid from processing iodine. And so the key hormones that are triggered by the iodine simply just don't happen in the body. And here in the state of California, in very short order, they're going to be promulgating a cleanup standard for perchlorate. And it'll probably be 6 parts of perchlorate per billion parts of water. 6 parts per billion. In the state of Massachusetts, they have a more protective standard that goes down to 1 part per billion, as does the state of Maryland.
Well, I mean, it's an unfortunate series of chain reactions that the perchlorate affects the thyroid and stops the hormone. So where does this perchlorate comes from? Cactus?
No. Actually, perchlorate was discovered here to be used in rocket fuel right here in Southern California at the Jet Propulsion Lab.
Is it a natural substance or an artificial?
There is some that exists naturally, but over 90% of all perchlorate in the environment now comes from military activity.
Jet fuel?
Oftentimes jet fuel. Oftentimes from solid rocket fuel. The idea is that you need a very rapid explosion, so you embed an oxidizer in the explosive itself. And so perchlorate is that oxidizer. It's not the explosive, it's the oxidizer in the explosive. There's a lot of perchlorate in 4th of July fireworks because you need that rapid explosion. It's in some bombs that are even used in the studios. In road flares, they use perchlorate as well. And so occasionally it's used for non-military purposes, but the vast majority is for military purposes. There was a huge facility that made perchlorate that happened to be located very close to the shores of Lake Mead, right outside of Las Vegas. And the perchlorate from this facility, run by Kerr McGee, traveled down the Las Vegas Wash and entered into Lake Mead. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds of perchlorate has gone into the Colorado River water. And what happens to it after it goes into the Colorado River? Goes downstream, and it's brought to Southern California. And so over the last few decades, school children here in Los Angeles have literally been drinking the toxic remnant of building jet fuel and rocket fuel, not jet fuel, but rocket fuel in the drinking fountains on our local schools.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question which we didn't prepare or anything, but I'm not a chemist, but normally chemical compounds get attached. You know, so this perchlorate in Lake Mead, why would it be so stable as to come all the way down to Colorado? How come it didn't get attached to other molecules or evaporate or something?
Oh, it did, actually. Perchlorate is an ion. It's a salt. And so the salt travels very well in water. But what happens to the water in the Colorado River? And we're talking about parts per billion. We're talking about 6 parts of perchlorate per billion parts of water. And in the state of California, we're going to say that's too much. We're drawing the line at 6 parts per billion. So yes, it does attach to water, and it has traveled to Southern California. Coming out of our taps right now, they're finding perchlorate at 6 and 7 and 8 parts per billion today. So this isn't something of the ancient past. And it's true up at the Whitaker Burmite site in Santa Clarita. That place has been so polluted in Santa Clarita that they can't use that water, that local groundwater, for this development. Therefore, the development can't go ahead. But to the bigger issue of military production in Southern California, I would bet that most of the viewers simply don't know that vast swaths of Southern California are considered toxic because of military production. The entire San Gabriel Valley, Valley is an Environmental Protection Agency Superfund cleanup site. How many people knew that?
You mean San Gabriel, Pasadena?
Everything, the entire San Gabriel
Pomona?
Valley. That's the Pomona Valley.
Okay.
The entire San Gabriel Valley is an EPA federal cleanup site. The eastern half of the San Fernando Valley, the entire eastern half, from Burbank all the way over to San Fernando and down, is also a Superfund site. Now, why are they Superfund sites? In the San Gabriel Valley, it's due in large measure to the Aerojet facility that is in Azusa. And why is the San Fernando Valley an EPA cleanup site? Not exclusively, but in large measure to the Lockheed facility that was at the Burbank Airport for so many decades. They've been working on jets there for many years, and they were using not perchlorate per se. We're moving on to other chemicals here. They used a lot of what's called volatile organic compounds, VOCs. And the chief bad guy among those VOCs is a chemical called trichloroethylene, and an acronym is TCE. And TCE is sort of like, it's a solvent. It's like a paint thinner, but worse. And what happens is that if you use this solvent, it hits the ground as a liquid. It migrates underground as a liquid, and there are these vast plumes that then travel underground. So you have to think of Los Angeles in a different way now, because underneath Los Angeles, because of all the military production, because of Burbank, because of Rocketdyne, because of Aerojet, because of the entire South Bay, you know, the Northrops and the TRWs that are now all Northrop Grumman, the Boeing facilities in Anaheim and Huntington Beach and all these other areas, all these places use these highly toxic chemicals. And they've all gone underground, and they've traveled as a plume underground. But if you ever look at paint thinner, you know, you can see that it creates fumes. It's volatile. And so it might be a liquid, but it also turns into a gas. And that's what's happening throughout Southern California right now with this chemical, TCE, is that these plumes are now coming up from underground, under homes, under schools, under offices. And so these chemicals, building all these weapons all these years, doing the right thing here in Southern California, that's not a bad thing, But there's a cost to it, and there's a health cost to it. And the people who are paying this health cost are oftentimes the most vulnerable among us, or children, infants and children, who get exposed to these chemicals, and it can have some very dire consequences.
Because they're in a stage of development, or because they're like more susceptible at their age, less, I don't know why. Children are more vulnerable,
Children's cells are rapidly multiplying, and because of that, there's a greater vulnerability. If you look at any of the sort of longevity curves that insurance companies come up with, you know, that there's greater incidence of health risk and death at the beginning of life and at the very end, where there's sort of a stability in the middle years. And so both with the children and with the elderly, they're most vulnerable to environmental toxins more than people in the, you know, sort of the middle years of life.
Well, on behalf of my cynical scientific friends, I have to ask you the following. This may be true, but how would you compare these risks or these threats to other things? Like, you know, anybody who's been in Los Angeles and has gone to Fairfax and 6th knows there's methane.
Right.
And there's methane all over LA. There's also radon. There's also earthquakes.
Right.
And et cetera. So there are always environmental hazards. So what I'm trying to ask here is, yeah, this might be a threat that's increased triple. But if it's three people out of a million are affected as opposed to 1 out of a million, well, honestly, we're not going to care. We'll take our chances. So how significant is this increased threat from military toxins?
Well, this is the way law determines that question. We have a cleanup standard that has been arranged by the federal government. It's the CERCLA law. It's the federal Superfund law that mandates how things should be cleaned up. And currently, we try to clean up chemicals so that no more than 1 out of a million people are killed by a contaminant that's left behind.
So I just happened to hit on the right order of magnitude. And it's 1 out of a million is
1 out of a million, and that number, given some circumstances and exemptions, can go down to 1 in 100,000 individuals.
You mean, okay.
And then, under other circumstances, it can go down to 1 in 10,000 people that can be killed by a chemical that's left behind by a corporation or by the federal government. But that's the bottom of the elevator. Never goes beneath 1 in 10,000 individuals.
And that's mortality.
That is a fatal cancer.
So therefore, if there's 1 mortality in, let's say, 10,000, you said?
1 in 10,000.
Okay, that's really tolerant. But that would mean that there's probably going to be 30 or 40 people who are physically affected.
That's very true. When it comes to a fatal cancer, to give you an example, we were talking about perchlorate and affects the thyroid, and there's a lot of concern. There's the possibility of perchlorate leading to thyroid cancer. There isn't a direct link necessarily to cancer. There's assuredly reproductive health repercussions from exposure to perchlorate, which means that, you know, in utero, when the baby is gestating, there may be some mental deficits if the pregnant mother drinks water that's tainted with perchlorate and she suffers from a poorly functioning thyroid. There can be some mental deficits then in the child. But you have to think about this. We're talking about an area where there are literally millions of people drinking this water. And out of those millions of thyroid problems, they number in the hundreds of thousands. Of those hundreds of thousands, how many people are pregnant? They number in the many thousands. And so there are many thousands of children who are going to be born with a less developed mental capacity than the rest of us just because they're drinking the water, and that is wrong.
Well, I agree. And you can't really avoid that by drinking bottled water, because you're going to wind up using the water for bathing, and you're going to use the water to make spaghetti, and you're going to use the water to cook in other ways.
Well, in fact...
And then the bottled water, you have no guarantee that they've removed the perchlorate either.
In the perchlorate, right now, they use this water to... it's in the Colorado River, so that's used for agriculture. So in the lettuce that they're using this water in Yuma counties and Imperial Valley. They're finding perchlorate in the lettuce. They have done studies of milk that's produced by cattle that are fed the oats and the alfalfa that's grown near the Colorado River. And there's perchlorate not only in the milk, but also in the meat of the cow. And so even in organic lettuce, they're finding perchlorate. So the answer is to go upstream, is to deal with the problem at its roots. Now, there is some good news. There are some new technologies where they're using these biological agents that kind of go in, and these bioorganisms eat the perchlorate. And it's actually a wonderful thing. But what we have to do as the public is that we have to insist that the people in government do the responsible thing and clean this stuff out of our water to the best of their ability. And I would add this, make the people who put it there responsible for paying for it. Why should it be the ratepayers? Why should it be the people who are just supposed to rely on having good water, to pay for it? How about those corporations that are making billions of dollars in profit? Why don't they spend a few million and clean up our water that they dirtied? Why not? And they're fighting it tooth and nail.
And who's they?
It's mostly the defense contractors.
Being
Lockheed Martin and others. Lockheed Martin has taken sort of the lead, and they've formed these groups that are called the Perchlorate Study Group and the Council on Water Quality. They come up with these bogus names to try to fool the public and to try to fool the regulators. But, if you follow the money, you'll see who's paying for all this nonsense. They stand to save many millions of dollars by getting ratepayers to pick up the slack. And unfortunately, some members of Congress who have perchlorate in their district are going along with that. They're making Californians pay rather than making the defense contractors pay. I think that's wrong.
Is this a situation similar to the tobacco industries where at the time those responsible knew there was bad indications from what they were doing and they covered it up? Do you think these industries, Lockheed Martin, knew ahead of time or at the time?
I frankly can't conjecture. There are some people who believe. I actually don't believe that. I believe that right now they're trying to avoid responsibility for cleaning up these materials. They're trying to save money. And I think it's bad public relations, but they're not really selling products the rest of us buy. So right. I don't think they really care that much.
That's right.
But
their clients as governments.
They should do the right thing and get this junk out of our drinking water. The other thing is that here locally, there's this facility called the Rocketdyne Laboratory. It's at the western end of the San Fernando Valley above Chatsworth. And I mentioned perchlorate. There's a bunch of perchlorate they've used up there because of the rockets that they've tested over the last few decades. Thousands of rocket tests, thousands of them. And they've put a lot of junk into the atmosphere as well as into the groundwater. They're also finding that chemical, trichloroethylene, TCE, after a rocket launch. You know what they did? They took buckets of this stuff, this solvent, splashed it all around these test stands, rolls off, goes right into the ground. There's 500,000 gallons, according to the government, 500,000 gallons of this TCE in the ground there. And does it just stay in the ground there? Of course not. It's volatile. It comes up into the atmosphere.
But it also travels geographically.
Very slow. TCE is slow moving, not as fast as perchlorate. Perchlorate, again, is a salt, moves very quickly. TCE is a lot slower, but it does move also through the subsurface.
This is otherwise known as Bell Canyon, this area.
That whole area above Chatsworth, yeah. There's Dayton Creek, Bell Canyon. It's the headwaters of the LA River, by the way, up there. So it's right next to Amundsen Ranch, that area that's been preserved up there.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we can rely on the beneficence of the corporations responsible for the act. So what can...
With one exception, Ken. You know who's doing the right thing?
No, I'm shocked.
It's really great. NASA.
Oh.
NASA at the Jet Propulsion Lab is cleaning up the water. That's also a Superfund site, by the way, right up next to Pasadena, all that area, But they're doing the right thing, and they're cleaning up that stuff out of the water like you can't believe, the perchlorate. It's really heartening to see somebody do the right thing, and NASA's doing the right thing. You know who else is a really good government agency? Is the Metropolitan Water District. They have been putting a lot of pressure in Washington. They have gone to Washington to lobby to get this junk out of our water, and I think that's really laudable. Isn't that nice to hear?
Yes, yes. It's very good to hear some good news, some responsible people.
Yep.
And what do you advise the average citizen to do? Because, I mean, let's get over this shock and handle it.
You're going to, when the person who gets the thing in the mail, you know, you get your bill in the mail, and once a year they give a little report on the quality of your drinking water. And open it up and read that. And in that you will see, you know, the name of this chemical, perchlorate, and you should know that that comes from, you know, military production over the years. You'll also see things called alpha and beta. These are the radiation that is in our drinking water as well. That also comes from military production in large measure. And there's also VOCs or trichloroethylene. You'll also see that on your list. And call your water board. Let them know that you're paying attention. Let them know that you don't want these toxins in your drinking water, and that your water agency and your water board should do everything in their power to try to clean it up, to make sure, you know, your family isn't being exposed to this. You know, we should have clean water, the most basic thing in life.
But how do you find this water board? I mean, that's not going to be on the bill. So you're saying it is on the bill.
It is on the bill.
So you're not communicating back to the company that provides the water. You're communicating to the water board.
It is. It's one and the same, Ken.
It's the same.
One and the same.
The water board is the company, Department of Water and Power.
Yes, I don't know who all the viewers live in this area, so it's mostly it'll be the Department of Water and Power in the city of Los Angeles, but there are many other water purveyors in Southern California, so it kind of depends where the person's at.
But just what is this thing with the radiation in the water? I never heard this one.
It's in the LA Times once every few months. There is a uranium mine that's located right outside of Moab, Utah. And I don't know how many of your viewers have ever gone to Canyonlands or Arches National Parks. But this area where they had this uranium mine, literally it's right on the shores of the Colorado River. And it has been, this was uranium to be used in building nuclear bombs. This is what they were doing out there, and they were using the uranium for that. And so the radioactive materials that they mined and were milling right next to the river has been leaching into the Colorado River, you know, the last few decades. I have to tell you, it's again, the Metropolitan Water District went to Washington and has lobbied assiduously to get that thing cleaned up. The Bush administration had this crazy notion they were going to lay some concrete on top of it and walk away. Like, you know, like what's that going to do? You know, like concrete doesn't crack, water doesn't get in. You know, you're in the middle of the desert, it's going to crack. And so now, the Metropolitan Water District and a few others have done such a good job in lobbying, they've even convinced the Bush administration to start this, well, I think it's like a 10-year process of loading that junk onto trucks and hauling it away so it won't be affecting our drinking water any longer.
To remove it from the...
Next to the river. Get it away from the river. Yeah.
And this is what's generally called uranium tailings.
That's correct. The uranium mill tailings, yeah.
So is that a big threat, or is it just going to give you a little buzz, the radiation?
Well, there's no amount of radiation that's safe, Ken. In fact, the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Radiation is called the BEER Committee. The biological effects of ionizing radiation just met. Here we are in 2005. The BEER 7 committee just met, and they said it again, definitively. There is no safe amount of radiation. There's no threshold beneath which you're not at risk. And so what they recommend and what our organization, Physicians for Social Responsibility, recommends is limiting the amount of radiation to which you're exposed. A third of all Americans die from cancer. Of that third, it's assumed that about 8 to 10% die from being exposed to just background radiation. Everyday life, there's radiation. There's the radon gas that you spoke of. There's cosmic bombardment. We're being exposed to different rays coming from outer space that come through, buzz through our bodies, break up the cells and DNA, and sometimes when those cells reconstitute themselves, they form cancer cells rather than healthy cells. And so what we believe is that we need to limit the amount of radiation in the environment and not send it around. There's this crazy notion right now, and I'm afraid because the voice of the people are weak and the voice of corporations are stronger, I hate to say that there's this crazy idea that they're going to take radioactive metal from nuclear power plants, from places where they're building atomic bombs, and send them to metal recyclers. Things that are really radioactive. Send it off, and those metal scraps get reconstituted into other things. And so we might have baby carriages that used to be part of a nuclear power plant. We might have braces that are, or glasses, or whatever. It's a crazy notion. Every additional insult to radiation that the body gets is not good for one's health.
I hope you appreciated the show. I want you to go to psrla.org. That's Jonathan's organization, Physicians for Social Responsibility. psrla.org. And see what you can do to contribute. And if you don't, well, at least do something this week to help somebody else. Thanks for watching. See you next time.